Welcome back to Life Bursts with Matt and Sarah, and we are chatting to Keith, who has brought in these amazing props.
What are you doing?
Which
it's not even on.
Some microphones, some recording equipment, and all this is a part of that collection, the museum that your father had begun to collect, and that you now carry on. So tell us a bit more of that story.
Yeah, sure. So in my father's retirement in the 80s, he started collecting a variety of different things. Some equipment he was involved in manufacturing in the 1950s, a brand called Ferry Sound Industries. It was developed by a guy called Jack Ferry, who passed away in 1966. But then he sort of went on to collect all sorts of other things, and the front room of the family home was empty and available. So
because you moved out, right?
Yeah. So it progressed to shelving on every wall, with a lot of equipment. And when we finally catalogued the collection and packed it up, there was over 400 items. So there's about 30 items in the Jack Ferry collection, Ferry Sound Industries collection.
Where did he get these from? Like, did he buy them? Was it just given to him?
Some of them he actually chased up the people that originally bought the equipment. Or, I mean, there's one recorder I've got that was in the Loxton drive-in theatre for a long time as a background music player.
Oh, wow.
And that closed, I don't know what year, but it closed, and somehow someone knew Nev, and it came back into the collection that way. So, yeah, there's probably, in the original collection of 400, there's probably close to 200 radios, mostly valve radios, some transistor radios, generally 1930s to 80s. But there's also a lot of recorders, audio recorders, so reel-to-reel, like is down the front there.
We do have one, yeah. So for our audio listeners, it's definitely a reel-to-reel. That's exactly what it looks like.
Big, heavy thing that was made in 1952, which was about their second or third version of recorders. I have got one that's 1949, was one of their first.
How long would the tape on those reels work for?
Depends on the speed you run at, and the faster you go, the better the quality. The slower you go is more suited to speech, voice only, not music.
Okay.
That doesn't make much sense. What do you mean slower and faster?
Okay, so the actual how fast the reels turn and the tape goes past.
So they're quite large, these reels, so a fair bit of tape.
Yes, it's a rectangular box with the tape on top and the controls on the front and on the top as well.
So just for voice oral history or something, you could get 3 or 4 hours on a tape at a slower speed. But there's all sorts of other recording formats. So before tape, which reel-to-reel tape was followed by compact cassette, which Sony
which are a little bit smaller.
Made their millions out of.
Yes.
But prior to reel-to-reel tape, there was recording on wire, a really thin wire on spools.
Wow.
Okay.
For a number of years, which continued on into use in black boxes, actually, in planes for a long time.
And how does that work?
So it's still a magnetic impression. So you're taking audio through a microphone and a voltage and recording it onto a medium that has a magnetic substrate, like there's metal in it somewhere. So wire was able to do the same thing, but there's also a whole lot of dictation devices and things, records that were a magnetic substrate with a groove and a record playhead that tracked across the record that was used for dictation and a lot of those sort of things. So there were a whole bunch of formats, some that didn't last very long. And amongst all of those, there's 8-track cartridge players that were in cars for a while.
What's that?
So a square cartridge with a tape inside it that you could put into the dash of your car. and it would play music.
So not like a cassette, but
Similar concept, but it actually had 4 tracks, so you could have a whole album on the tape, and it would play continuously.
and how would that work? I know these things, but I know there's would be people watching
Sure.
that may not know how this works or what you're even talking about.
Yeah. So it's all about a tape of some format, whether it's reel-to-reel or cassette or whatever, passing over a record playhead, and in the record mode you're putting electrical currents in and impregnating things into the tape, and then on the playback you're bringing it back out into a speaker.
There we go. So just be simple, push it into your car
Yeah.
and press play.
So it was a very short season.
Yeah, there were even record players in cars
Oh, wow.
for a short period.
How did that even work?
Very lots of springs and things, but lots of different formats. So within the collection there's at least a couple of hundred audio recording devices, some quite rare, some that only lasted a very short period of time. And most people know compact cassette because it was around for the longest.
Yes,
It's
they're
the
those
most
tiny,
successful.
tiny little record,
Yeah.
tiny little
Yeah.
plastic
Tapes.
rectangular.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. There's Gen Zs out there that don't even know what we're talking about right
No,
now.
they don't even know what a CD
They
is.
don't know what a CD is.
Yeah, you see them
so-
on retro T-shirts. Yeah.
That's
That's
true.
it.
You do.
Yes.
You do.
And if you wanted to wind them on, you'd put a pencil through
yes.
Yes. I
and turn the
know about
pencil
that.
And
to
they would
turn the
inevitably
spools.
break inside the car. Anyway, but that's
Yeah.
memory. So you've got, a lot of these things through their eras would have been just thrown away when they broke by people. So you've been able to preserve, with your dad's help, a number of specific items.
So he collected and repaired, and everything in the collection was working in the by the end of the 80s. And it stayed open as a registered private museum through to his passing in 2008, and then he left the whole lot to me. And I kept the whole front room set up the way it was through until 2018. I did have it open during some history festivals, had people come from all over South Australia to see the collection. But when my mother passed in 2018, my brother and I decided to renovate and sell the property, the family home. So I started cataloguing and packing and sorting and all those things. And about the same time, I was given some portable cases that were used for transporting lighting equipment. And I started fitting those out as portable display, transport, storage cases for some of this equipment. So I can now just roll it into a library, stand it up, open the doors, and I've got an exhibition behind Perspex. So I think in the last 6 years, yes, I've curated 18 pop-up exhibitions in local libraries across South Australia, usually for a month or more, usually during the History Festival, which is always May every year. And amongst that is 4 cases of the Jack Ferry story and the equipment, and I have a PowerPoint presentation, and I do oral history talks, typically in the libraries as well.
So why do you like this?
Part of it is continuing my father's passion and vision. Secondly, that it's a good, strong Adelaide, South Australian story. Thirdly, that there's still people around that remember some of that stuff, not for too much longer. But probably the key to it is in the library exhibitions, even though I'm only there for a short period of time setting it up and packing it up, I don't sort of go back every week and stand around to chat to people. Even while I'm setting up and packing up, people come past, typically parents with their kids or grandparents with their children and their grandchildren, and just seeing this equipment tricks off stories and things between generations that wouldn't have been tricked off if they didn't see it. And it can be that's exactly the radio my father had, or my grandfather had, and we sat down around, listening to Blue Hills or whatever, through to, I think that's the one, but here's this story that's attached to that memory.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And now I'm not being cheesy like Matt and holding one of the microphones from the 1940s or 50s.
But there's some
You
good
can
props.
do that though.
Yeah, we've got
You
some
can
great
do
props
that
here.
just fine.
We'll come back to those.
Yeah.
But Keith, a part of the story and this history, you've mentioned someone called Jack Ferry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my father worked in a small factory in Mitcham or Clapham on Springbank Road through the 50s, pretty much from 50 through to very early 60s, where they started making valve radios, then moved to wire recorders for a short period, and then reel-to-reel tape recorders, initially just as audio recorders and then with radios built in the front. And in the later part of the 50s, they built school PAs and all sorts of other bits and pieces until basically Japanese manufacturer depression lifted and things. So Jack Ferry was someone my father met in the 40s, in the late 40s, and started making some things for him, winding some transformers and things like that in our at home.
What's a transformer that's not the movie?
Something that handles voltage, usually steps voltage from 240 volts to a different voltage.
So it changes.
And it has to be hand wound and or on a winder, and is basically in every device that we connect to the power will have a transformer in it of some sort. And it has laminations and anyway.
What's lamination?
That's my best. Well,
okay, what else? Anyone?
that's my best description, so I'll leave it there.
Okay.
But my father started making some of these things and then ended up working for Jack Ferry. Now, Jack Ferry, from this book my father published in 1988, Adelaide's Early Radios and Tape Recorders, there's a whole chapter on Jack Ferry. And he was the son of an Adelaide racing identity by the name of Sid Ferry. He went to Scots College. He went into the AIF as a radar technician during the war. And when peace was declared, he came back to Adelaide, and that's when he started making radios and eventually registered Ferry Sound Industries in the very early 50s and started the factory in his garage, in his backyard at 99 Springbank Road, Clapham. And my father was one of 4 people that worked in that factory, and they produced about 5 machines per week, one a day. My father wrote a whole chapter in this book about Jack Ferry, and he was an entrepreneur, an ideas man. Probably like a lot of people copied some things from English machines, and it was depression period, so everything from overseas was quite expensive. And I suspect they'd pull their money together and buy one thing and get it here and then pull it apart and reverse engineer it and improve it and all those sort of things. But there was a lot of people involved in the army and the radar units and things who had knowledge and expertise that they then wanted to use after the war. Australian manufacture was very prominent. And in my father's research for the book, he identified that through the 1920s and 30s, there was something like 45 factories in the Adelaide metro area making valve radios. And it was one way to connect with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, newspapers would be days or weeks behind in what was happening in the world. Radio from the other side of the world, caught on long wave, was much more instant. Things like, cricket matches in England could be, the broadcasts could be picked up. And there's a story about in Highmarsh Square, the Healing Radio Factory were there on the side of Highmarsh Square, and they had big antennas on the roof, and they would pick up the cricket from England, and someone would re-announce it through speakers out into Highmarsh Square.
Yeah, okay.
And there's stories about in the evening, people bringing in their little fires and setting up and listening to the cricket out there, and it would be I've forgotten the word I just used, but re-announced, so to speak.
Re-announced.
And they would use a pencil on the table for the, crack of the bat. And
Bit of drama. Yeah, good.
Yeah,
all those sort of things. So so because my father was involved in that manufacture phase, in his retirement, he started recollecting some of those machines and putting them into the collection, which is around 30 items, which is very specific to South Australia, and quite unique in Australia too. There were audio manufacturers in Melbourne, particularly around the Olympics, which I think was 56, and the Queen's visit at the time. There were large outdoor events and things where sound reproduction was starting to be used. And a lot of it was developed in Australia. There's a story in the book about, reel-to-reel tape recorders, record something over a long period of time and then play it back. But there's a story in the book about Jack being asked to make a endless loop tape echo unit, which is just a continuous loop of tape and a record head and several playback heads to be used at Elder Park, where they were doing large concerts with people right back onto Kingham Road. And the stage, it would have been the sound shell, the advertiser sound shell at the time. And they wanted additional speakers partway back into the audience, and this endless loop tape echo created the delays for that production of sound, so that as the acoustic sound travelled away from the stage, the reinforced sound was in time with it.
Wow, okay.
So I don't have a picture of that.
Very technical.
That's okay.
I don't have a picture of it. I have other endless loop tape echo units. There's one in that I've had in display in one of my pop-up exhibitions, but very ingenious things that were developed. So the Jack Ferry collection is a very specific collection. The History Trust of South Australia said to me at the time when I was packing up the museum, this is a significant collection for South Australia, but they have a maritime museum, a migration and a motor, not an audio museum.
Right. Yep. So what you've collected in a way is significant.
But I found an outlet through libraries, particularly where they want to activate their spaces. They've got flexible spaces now, and they want to integrate with the community and put on events and things that bring people back into their spaces.
That's wonderful.
Thank you for watching this short clip of Life Bursts. You can like, subscribe or follow for more, or head to rawcut.com.au.